Well, one person's awake, and everyone seems to be afraid of the front seats here as well. Okay, well, welcome everybody. I will try and speak slow. How is everyone's English? Okay? Well, I'll try, as I said, I'll try and speak clear and slow. My native language is not English either. It's C#, but I'll try and make sure I speak clearly because your other choices in other languages I speak are worse. So, my name is Chad, also known as Kudzu. Most of you have probably never heard of Kudzu. If you look in the bottom of the left where it says check the airflow, the green plant there, that plant is called Kudzu, and it's actually Japanese honeysuckle. And in most areas of the world, it grows quite normally, like a normal plant. You might think of it like a grapevine, although it doesn't have grapes. But it looks like a grapevine. It crawls up trees like grapevines and does things like grapevines do. Except that in certain parts of the world, this plant grows 2 meters per week. And nothing stops it. They tested 12 herbicides on the plant. Herbicides, these are things you pour on plants to kill them. 10 of them had no effect. 2 of them made it grow better. The only known herbicide that kills it has side effects. It's called napalm. If you want to know more about this plant and why I have this nickname, you can go in the bottom right. There are 2 websites there. The first one is my professional website. The second one is my non-professional geeky type website. It's where I put my blogs and pictures and all kinds of things, and there's all kinds of information there. And I have the privilege of being able to add a new country to my map. You can see my map in the top right. These are all the countries I've been to. Most of them I've spoken in. And it's not very often that I get to add a new one in there. And there's a lot of little small ones in there. So I think Hungary will make number 55 for me. And I have Ireland coming up, so I'll have 56. And I have Sweden coming up as well. So I'll be able to expand. I'm trying to break that 60 barrier. Behind Check the Airflow, that's not the title of my slide. I thought about what should I call my session. And last minute I thought about calling it Check the Airflow, but I didn't. So behind that it says software safety. Maybe you should look on the screens up here and I'll try not to stand in front of them. And what do we mean by software safety? Now, we have software security, and I hope most of us know what that means. We're talking about securing the applications down and user rights and those sorts of things. And in recent years, especially with .NET, we have managed code, and we've started to accept it as a premise that we should be doing things like checking for buffer overruns and not allowing index out of bounds to corrupt memory, etc. And that might seem strange to us as architects, but a lot of programmers don't accept these as good things. Now, how many of you have a C or a C++ background? Okay, a few people. Now I'm going to pick on you a little bit. C and C++ people, not all of you, but a lot of C and C++ developers, they like to test something. And when they ship it, they turn off everything because they want it to run very, very quickly, right? And turning on things like bounds checking just slows down the program. And their answer is, well, when it crashes, well, then we'll ship you a debug build. See if you can reproduce it, and then I'll fix it. But let's imagine we're driving a car. Now, when I crash a car, and the developer decided to remove the airbags and the anti-lock brakes and the safety glass and the seat belts to make the car go faster, if I've had to have my leg amputated, do I want a debug car? No. I want the car with the anti-lock brakes, with the airbags, all of those things built in. And I hope that as a community we're realizing that these are good things. Now, of course, in C++ there were a lot of very heavy options we wouldn't want to turn on. But the point is there's a lot of them that are very, very good and should always be on. If you look at the bugs that existed in software, even let's pick on Microsoft. Look at the bugs that existed 5 years ago in IIS, in Windows, in any Microsoft product. What was the #1 cause? Memory overruns, pointers. Basically, everything was caused by pointers. Now in .NET, we don't have pointers, thankfully. And these are the sorts of things I'm going to talk about. But more specifically, I'm going to talk about the user interface. How are we causing errors through the user interface, and what can we do to prevent them? This is a 200-level session in the spirit of the American Terror Alert System. So it's just a 200. It's not something any really advanced. I used to work for Microsoft Corporation, and I always put this slide in here because if you search on the internet for my name, you'll see I work for Microsoft, but I don't anymore. It's old information. It's not that anything went wrong. In fact, I still do, most of my work is for Microsoft, but I'm not a Microsoft employee anymore. And just kind of a disclaimer. They didn't let me in this picture because in 1978, the minimum hair requirements were pretty high, as you can see. Now, this might be a, can anyone identify what this is? No, it's kind of close up. Well, the gray part is an airline armrest. Everyone's been on an airplane, right? I was on 2 of them today. In fact, I didn't think I would make it. They had to close the runway to plow the snow. There are places colder than Hungary, and I came from one of them today. So here's a typical airline armrest, and there's my leg. And I'm not exactly a small guy, but I'm not massive. I used to be quite massive if you find some old pictures of me. But economy seats are pretty small, especially if you've ever flown on some of the Eastern European airlines. And I don't know about Malev. I haven't been on any of the old planes, but I've been on Aeroflot and Russia, and I've been on quite a few of the old Russian airlines, and the seats are pretty small. Now, this one's not from one of those. This is from one of the Western European airlines. But what would possess someone that I have so few centimeters to myself to steal one of my centimeters for the headphones? Why would they think it's a good idea to put hard, sharp objects into my leg? I've left airplanes with permanent bruises in my leg because I don't have enough room to move around as it is. And every time I squirm, I have these headphone jacks pointing into me. Furthermore, it causes premature failure because people are always pushing on the jacks. And I would hope it's never going to start a fire, but who knows? How difficult is it to take this and put it under the end of the armrest where most airlines put it? Now, if this was just one airline, we could just put it off. But this is quite a common place to put airline headsets. And what happened here? Well, probably some architect, because that's what he was after all. He was the seat architect, right? He might not have had that title on his business card, but he was an airline seat architect. And there are people that think about these things. And one day they decided we need to put an entertainment system. And, well, we'll put it in the armrest. But he didn't bother to test it. Or maybe he only flew first class, never bothered to be his own user. We need to be our own users and think about these things. So I'm a bit of an efficiency expert. I'm always looking for things, whether it be in software or anything. How could we make this better? It's just something that bugs me. But I'm always looking for good examples as well. Now, one of the things that's also kind of irritating is on many of these planes, you can turn on the air, but it's like 3 meters above your head on some of these big planes, and you have to stand up on the seat to control the air. And, oh, it's too much. Now it's not on my head. Now it's on my foot. And you're jumping up and down to turn these stupid things. And here's an interesting idea, and this was actually on a Russian plane, and I believe it was an Ilyushin 86 or a 96. And what they have here is the fan is in the back of the seat in front of you. And it's really easy. It's got the little switch. You can turn it on and off. You can adjust it. You don't have to step and fall on the person next to you. Just a really unique idea. And in a place you would never expect it. And these are the sorts of things that in software we should be looking for. Maybe we're using a piece of software somewhere. It doesn't matter where. And we think, wow, that's something that's really innovative. That's something that's really easy to use. And start to replicate those in the software that we're building. Here's another example, and I think this one was on Emirates. I've been on quite a few planes that I had no idea I had electrical power because it was underneath the life jacket. Many airlines, they put them down under the seats, and you don't even know they're there. And even if you're looking through the book, some of our aircraft are equipped with electrical power. Well, how am I supposed to know which ones are and which ones aren't? And some of them are quite buried. Now, if you're in business class, it's not too difficult. But this one you'll never miss. Look, it's right on the back of the seat in front of me. And it even takes both continental plugs and North American plugs. Now, I live half the year between 2 countries, and in one of the countries we have the legacy of the British plugs. If anyone's seen those, they didn't fit that here because I think you need a first-class seat to be able to fit that big plug, but at least they got most of them there. And I want to introduce you to something that I call incrementalism. Don't worry, we will get to software. I'm showing you a lot of real-world examples first. Now, who can identify this? Everyone. You have running water here in Budapest, right? Okay. I went to the bathroom to check. Yes, you have running water. So this is a sink. But this sink is a little bit different. Do you have this style of sink with two separate taps here? No. Most countries. British, that's right. I didn't want to say it, but he said it, so. So I usually say there is one particular country that has these particular sinks, and I'm not sure why. And what's really amazing is that even in this country, not this country of Hungary, but the country that has these sinks, if they build a brand new airport or whatever it is, they will say, this is the epitome of technology. They'll have automatic doors, they'll have online check-in, and they'll still have these types of sinks. They could build a museum of technology and still put these sinks in. And I could never quite figure this out. And I went into, I'm really quite even paranoid about keeping my hands clean. And so, of course, I went to the toilet and I said, well, I need to wash my hands. And I couldn't figure out how to use this device properly. Because on the right side, you turn it on, and fortunately, they usually spring load them for me. So I've turned it on, and out of the right one comes quite cold water because it's not exactly a warm country. And then out of the left one comes lava because there's an underground volcano that no one knows about. So I'm trying to figure out what is the user interface pattern for this device. Am I supposed to turn them both on with some rubber bands because they're spring-loaded and take my hands and mix them back and forth? Or am I supposed to burn the left hand and freeze the right hand? What's the pattern for this thing? And what's that? Fill the basin, that's right. And so I asked somebody one time after I came back, he said, why is your one hand blue and one hand's red? And I said, well, can you instruct me how to use this? And he says, well, you have to understand you're supposed to put the stopper in the bottom and fill it up. Now, maybe at home, in my sink, I might want to do that. But in a public toilet, the only time I've ever seen someone use that stopper is when he's washing his feet, which doesn't really want to make me want to wash my hands in the same sink next. So I kind of asked, I said, is that really a good idea to put the stopper into the sink? And he says, but you have to understand history. And he said, 100 years ago, we didn't have a lot of water. And I said, well, not that I'm going to promote wasting water today. Sorry, but we have more water now. And in a public restroom, again, I don't want to wash my hands in the same sink that who knows what else has been washed in there. And he says, well, that's the way we do it. And I said, okay. But sometimes as developers, we look at something and we realize that, okay, there is something wrong here and we should improve it. But sometimes we shouldn't really improve it. Sometimes we should just eliminate it. We should say, I'm going to pretend that I never ever saw a sink. How would I devise a device for washing people's hands if I'd never seen a sink before? Or maybe sometimes we should look at what other people are doing, like the airplane example. I would have never ever thought in my life to put the vent in the back of a seat. But if I'd looked around at what some other aircraft manufacturers were doing in unlikely spots, in a 30-year-old aircraft from the Soviet Union, I may have had a good idea. Sure, there may be other things about the plane I didn't like, but there were some good ideas there as well. And so let's say that we wanted to do this. Now, what developers tend to do is they say, you're right. That's not exactly the best interface for today. Things have changed. We have a little more water, so let's build a sink that's more efficient on water. Okay? The problem is we as developers tend to upgrade. And once we upgrade once, it's not so bad, 2 times, 3 times. But after we've been through an upgrade 5, 6, 7, 8 times, we end up at a place we would never go to had we gone there directly. And so sometimes we need to do that mental reboot. And so let's pretend this is your software and you wanted to upgrade it. This is what a developer would typically do. Now it has sensors, but I've lost my stopper. This is not a photoshopped image. In fact, this is actually from an airport. So no one actually thought about this. They thought, we'll improve it, but they didn't really think about the end result. And so that's what I call incrementalism, and I see this all over software. So to pick on Microsoft again, now I like to pick on lots of people. Don't worry, I can bash Google, Yahoo, IBM, everybody equally fair. But I like to pick on Microsoft here and there, and don't worry, I give them lots of praise as well, but just to show I'm not impartial. And over the years, Word 1.0 started out with 50 items, actually less than 50 menu items. And in those days, a menuing system made perfect sense. Everything you wanted to find was there. Fonts, cut, paste, file, save, it was no problem. And over the years, the menu items went up and up and up, and it got to the point that they were approaching 300 items. And Microsoft had the same problems with task panes and toolbars. Now, has anyone seen the presentation before called the Microsoft Office History Museum? Okay, well, some brilliant person in Redmond, that I really want to thank him for this. Fortunately, he had a lot more time than I did. He went on to one of the Microsoft file servers and found every copy of Office Microsoft ever produced. Then he proceeded to make virtual PCs for Windows 95, Windows 98, and he installed every copy of Office. And so he had virtual PCs for every Office. Then he took screenshots, and then we borrowed them. So I'm glad he made them so I can reuse them. And I used to have some talks where I would just go through these slides and I'd say, here's what Word 1.0 looks like. It looks pretty simple. And then we'd go through up. And what I've done now is I've kind of done something a little bit different. I need to plug in these though, so hold on just a second. And so the basic point is he put these together, he let me borrow the slides, and since then I've kind of taken them and done something a little bit different with them, and I hope you'll like the result. So I'm just going to take you on a quick tour of the history of Microsoft Office, and you can see how the interface evolved. And so kind of the point was there, through all the Office versions, they started out with a very good premise, and they ended with so many menu items, it just wasn't working anymore. And fortunately with Office 2007, they kind of did a reboot. They stood back and they said, what can we do to make things easier? And they actually took away features. You saw the one slide there where they had menus, so many menus that they only had a little bit of workspace. And I've seen that on many users' desktops. And what Microsoft found out after research was that no one used that feature intentionally, or the people that used it intentionally was such a small, obscure number, they actually took away that feature because it was causing more problems than it was benefiting. Okay? And I'll talk a little bit later about how they came to that. Now this is an old, I think someone told me this is a DC-7. If you look at the modern cockpits of one of the brand new Airbuses or one of the brand new Boeings, they have glass cockpits now. Why? Because they had the same problem. They had so many controls there that weren't used. They had controls that were only used during takeoff. They had controls that were only used during taxi. They had controls that were only used during coming to the air gate. And with a glass cockpit, now they can show the pilots and the co-pilot and the navigator only what they need to see at any given time. And if you think about that, the Office ribbon panel is very much like that. And we need to think about that with our software, because I know that many of us, when we're building software, the first thing we do is we think, I'm going to build a new piece of software. I need a menu, I need a toolbar, I need a status bar, and a document window. And that's how I start out. And the application grows and grows and grows and grows. And we never go back. We never think about context. We think about, should we hide things, should we disable things, but we don't think much about how we should organize them so the user can very easily see them. We just think, well, this goes on this menu. I can fit 8 menus, so everything must fit in a menu, or a submenu, or a nested dialog. And that's where we run into problems. If anyone wants to use that video, it's on my website. Just please credit me. You can download it. It's around 21 megabytes compressed. So I want to talk about garbage in, garbage out. And the basic idea is that users will put garbage into our applications. If you give them a text box, they'll put anything they want in there, intentionally or not. And you might think, okay, it's easy, we'll validate it. But many of us don't validate it. We think it's too hard to validate it. We'll just throw it at the database, and if it gives us an error, then we'll throw an error back, or we'll throw it to the middle tier. And fortunately, most of us learned about the SQL injection problem because users would go in and enter things like semicolon drop table. So we learned to check for certain things like that, and we switched to parameterized SQL. But we still didn't do validation as much as we should have. So to give you a real-world example here, Christmas 2004, arguably probably one of the busiest flying days of the year in the whole world. Has anyone ever flown on Christmas Day? Trust me, you don't want to do it. Okay? It's a very crazy day with lots of crazy people, of people who don't fly very often. They fly once a year. They're already mad. They might be traveling with all the kids. They might be traveling with in-laws. They might have had a little bit to drink. And the airports are far beyond their capacity. So it's just not a fun time to begin with. Well, in 2004, Comair, which you've probably never heard of, but they're actually a fairly big airline. The big airlines, they have smaller airlines to run the shorter routes. So in Europe, we have KLM, and then we have KLM Cityhopper. Comair is one of the largest ones in the US, and they feed for Delta. And they fly a lot of planes. Well, their reservation system and their scheduling system completely went down. They might think reservations, no problem. Okay. But as soon as the scheduling system goes down, planes can't fly. The ones that are in the air, they can fly, they can land, but you can't have any new planes take off because you can't schedule them. And basically, they canceled 1,100 flights because of a software error. But what actually caused the software error? Well, basically, a user input incorrect data. It wasn't intentional. They just, typed a comma instead of a period or something like that. Well, the software did no validation. And until that point, no one had put in whatever character it was. But somebody put in some character. It probably wasn't a comma instead of a period. It was probably a percent sign or something. Something that got encoded to something else. Took down every flight in the system. It took them, I forget how long, around 8 hours to get the system back up. Now, worse yet, everyone's heard of software as a service. That's the big buzzword this last year, right? Well, software as a service really isn't anything new. 10, 15 years ago, people have been renting solutions off of mainframe hosted solutions for a long time. In fact, the airlines do it all the time. They rent their servicing and reservations out to other companies. So Comair had farmed this out to another company who was providing software as a service. Well, this company, who was providing the service, since they had a vertical system, also rented out to other companies. They didn't bother to have any isolation between the databases or the systems. So when Comair went down, it took US Airways down, which is one of the largest airlines in the world. That's why they canceled 1,100 flights. Now, how would you like to be US Airways? Your competitor's feeder airline took you down on Christmas Day. Think about the financial cost of this. And the industry reaction outside of the industry wasn't so good either. You can see two quotes here. The top one was from CNN. Actually, both of them were. And it says, obviously, the airlines have become way too dependent on computers. This is from an airline industry expert. Too bad he's a computer moron. It wasn't that the airlines are too dependent on computers. It's that certain airlines were dependent on idiot software vendors. But think about the damage that this does to us as an industry. Do you think the average reader of CNN understands the difference between software, computers, binary, rock and roll music? They don't know. To them, if a computer goes down, it's a computer. Must be a stupid programmer. And it was, but we're actually damaging our industry here, not to mention the financial impact. And then the other one is, if this kind of thing could happen by accident, what would happen if the bad guys did this on purpose? Oh, forget flying planes into places, forget trying to blow things up. Well, we'll just get someone hired in and just have them go to the keyboard and start typing away. That's so much easier. Now, this is just the reservation system. In some of my other decks, though, I do many different case studies, and I have a case study on the FAA, which is the Federal Aviation Administration for the US government. And their computer system was one of the oldest computer systems in existence. Until a few years ago, it ran on mainframes running tubes. They used to have to salvage old mainframes and keep a separate supply of tubes in stock to keep the American aviation system running. So you might say, okay, it's just a reservation system. But our software ends up many, many places, especially today. We're building components. Who knows where your software ends up? You can also have the opposite effect, over-validation. So this happened to me last week. I was receiving a FedEx package, which is fairly normal for me. I get packages all the time. And I decided this was actually a very important package. And it had to arrive. I told them, send it to Spain. I'm going to be in Spain. It has to arrive this week. And it's not something you can send back. It's something I absolutely had to have. So they gave me the tracking number, and I went and I tracked the package, and I thought everything's great. And it says, subscribe to receive email updates. And I thought, since I'm not always having internet access that week, it'd be great if I could get email updates. So I went, and I put in my email address, and it says invalid email address. Do you know why? Mm-hmm. No? .org. FedEx does not accept .orgs for emails. As soon as I changed it to another one of my email addresses with a .com, it took it just fine. Now, I can understand if they're turning down .biz. Even that's not quite acceptable. But .org has been around for how long? 1978 or something like that? It was one of the first ones there. It was com.org.net. How could you not even pay attention? And the problem here is that some programmer decided we're going to validate, but he didn't bother to actually check the proper documents. And this is actually well documented. Even this one, anyone knows this. But you shouldn't guess. You should go check. And there are RFCs that specify what is a valid email address. I also have another email address that it's 2 letters before the @ symbol. Basically, it's JM. And whenever I go somewhere and I don't want the person, I just want temporary, I put JM for junk mail. And it's a valid account. But many email services turn it down because someone has decided that all emails should be minimum 5 characters. Where is that written? It's not. I can make an email address 1 letter if I want. So if you're going to put validation in, which I encourage you to do, check the rules. Don't guess. And if there are documents, go look them up. And test. Easily mistaken instructions. Now, I'm going to pick a lot on airports and airlines, partially because I fly a lot, partially because they're so utterly incompetent. So here's an airport, and I'm going through, and my gate, well, let's not look at gate. Which way is gate B2? To the right or to the left? To the right.
Everything's to the right.
Everything's to the right, okay. So my gate's B13, so I come down, I see the sign. Okay, B13, I go down. Now this gate is around 15 minutes walk. It's a very big airport. I've got bags, I'm tired, I'm transiting. And I get down there, and so I get down to B terminal. And sorry, my gate was C13. And I see C14, so I'm looking around for C13. I don't see it, so let's take a wider view. C14, C12, but I don't see a C13. Now, it's not so common here in Europe, although I think in some countries. But I grew up in Canada, and I lived in the US for many years. And I live in Europe now, and I have for many years. But they don't have 13th floors on buildings in North America because no one wants to work there. If you go to a hotel and check in the 13th floor, people just don't want to go there. So you get in the lift, and it goes 10, 11, 12, 14, 15. And most people don't even notice it. But if you don't believe me, next time you go to North America, check it out. There's no 13th floor. And so I thought, uh-oh, there's no 13th gate. Where am I supposed to go? So I'm asking around. Now, fortunately, I speak English. And English being a fairly common language, it didn't take very long to find someone else who also spoke English. But imagine that I was coming in from, I don't know where, but if I didn't speak English, how am I going to find someone who speaks Zimbabwean or something? And a lot of travelers don't speak English, right? And they don't speak the native language of this country. So I finally found out, well, sir, your gate isn't here. Now this is on a corner. I'm coming down the hallway. Once I mentally process C1 to 23. 13's between 1 and 23. I don't think to read any farther. Why should I? I have found the answer I'm looking for. Couldn't someone have fixed this? Is it really difficult? I mean, tape, whiteout, paint, I don't care, but fix the thing. I guarantee people have missed their plane because of this. And worse yet, this airline is really bad about missing your plane. In fact, I took these pictures a couple years ago. But a couple weeks ago, I was flying through this airline's hub. And don't worry, it's not Hungary, but it is a European airline. And they canceled my train on the way to the airport. The train was just flat out canceled because they found they suspected a bomb on the tracks. So I made it to the airport late, and I got to the airport, and I figured, well, I've missed things before because I travel to Africa and I go to the Middle East, and I have actually missed planes because of bombs in hotels and things. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm here. I'm 5 minutes past boarding. Just put me on the next flight. And they said, okay, there's 3 more flights tomorrow to where you're going. And there were 150 empty seats between these 3 flights. They said, no, you have to pay the fare difference. And since it's a last-minute fare, you only have the most expensive options. I'm like, well, duh, of course it's a last-minute fare. So this airline will not board you. In fact, another gentleman next to me had missed his train was late because, unfortunately, somebody jumped in front of his train. And the airline still told him, sorry, it's not our problem. So I can guarantee when people come to this gate late and they say we couldn't find the gate, I can tell you what this airline tells them. It's not our problem. Now, if we look at this map, here you can see the power of Tablet XP. The C gate is actually pretty far away. The C gate is this one over on the left, C13, but the other gates are way down to the right. That's around a 20-minute walk. So I've seen the sign, 15 minutes down, 15 minutes to find out that I'm not crazy, 15 minutes, so there's 30 minutes, 20 minutes to walk back, 50 minutes I've lost. Add 50 minutes to your transfer, you can easily miss a plane, can't you? And when the airline tells you, sorry, not our problem, you have to buy a new ticket. You're stuck in an airport that's not even yours. That's a pretty bad situation, all because somebody just couldn't fix a sign. Here's another example. So I'm flying, and this airline actually is a really good airline. But they have, every airline at least has some small issues, and this isn't the same airline, by the way. So this is in Athens Airport, and I'm going to check in, and I see this sign. And does anyone here read Greek? I can read a bit. But the thing is, when there's Greek and English, I don't read Greek super well. I have very limited amount of words that I know. I know the alphabet, I know the sounds, but my vocabulary is very limited. So if I see Greek and English, I tend not to pay attention to the Greek whatsoever. So I see this sign, and it says, economy class, all destinations. So here I am. I go up, stand in line, wait 20 minutes with my bag, get to the front. Sir, you're in the wrong line. So what do you mean I'm in the wrong line? You need to go to that line. So I go to the line, and what's happened is this sign is actually rotating. This is their Greek version, and this is their English version. Although their English version, Greek destinations, economy class, all destinations. So still that reads to me, hey, Greek and everywhere else too, right? No, they mean all Greek destinations. So I go to the other counter. I wait another 20 minutes. Now, fortunately, I'm not late. And I get to the front, and I'm not mad. But I kindly tell this gentleman at the front, I said, you know, these signs are a little bit confusing. And I wasn't the only person. Every couple minutes, someone would run over from the other line. And I said, I think you might want to mention to management that maybe you could just change a couple words in these signs because people are coming over and the people in this line are getting mad that people are cutting, and it's kind of a problem. Now, where I'm leading with all this is that should have been the opportunity to say, you know, you're right, sir, I'll tell management. Or, okay, I'll pretend to tell management or something. I was giving them feedback, and I wasn't even yelling. Instead, the gate agent says, no, they don't say that. I said, you want to bet? I just took a picture. Here, take a look. Well, I guess it does. But no, you're just misunderstanding. This one here says all destination. He should have taken that as input. But how do we take it when users come to us? Our first reaction is, stupid user. Right? That's our first reaction. We should be thinking about these things. Now, users are stupid. Okay? And don't worry. Even if we fix as much as we can, we think, oh, well, this person did this and we fix this. We get to laugh at these things. Laugh behind their back, but then think about how we can fix it. And don't worry, if you're worried that you're going to fix all of your laughs, don't worry. There are some users that are so stupid, you'll still have those ones to deal with. Look at the first line of this. This is virtual PC. Before you compact this virtual hard disk, you must zero out free space on it with a third-party tool that you install on the guest operating system. What? Why even bother to tell me that? Why have this feature if I have to buy a third-party tool to use this first? Has anyone used Windows Tablet? I'm going to show you some demos of this later if we have some time. Here's a keyboard. Looks pretty normal. Anyone notice anything a little bit strange? There's a power, sleep, and wake key. Now I commend someone for thinking. Because, say 30 years ago when I first started getting into computing, actually not quite 30, but pretty close, all the computing switches, they were way around back of the computer. You had to crawl underneath the desk, or back then, actually, they weren't even under the desk, they were on top, but you were always bumping the power switch. You'd push the keyboard, which was the whole computer, and poof, the computer went off. And so it's kind of a good idea to put the power switches where we can reach them, but if you're going to put, how often do you guys use the power button? Maybe once a day? How often do you use maybe the page down button? Pretty often. How often do you use the cursor keys? I know that when I'm at home, my left hand's parked in the middle of the keyboard, my right hand's parked on those cursor keys. And I'm jumping around. And it's been a while, so I touch type by now. I used to type the biblical method, which was seek and ye shall find, but I gave that up. And so I know that when I'm on the cursor keys, if I want to go page down, the next key up is page down. Except in this case, it's wake. Well, if the computer's already awake, no problem. But what happens when I want to delete something? Don't worry, I'm going to delete lots of things, including the power. So if you're going to do something, certainly check the frequency of things. And I've seen toolbars exactly like this, where somebody puts a delete button next to the open button. Does it really make sense? Because the user doesn't delete nearly as frequently as they might open. Think about the frequency of things, and this should come into your placement. How often does somebody use this feature? I should keep it away from a feature that's very frequently used, especially if this toolbar button does something very drastic. Here's another keyboard. And that last keyboard, you can say, okay, well, that's just some weirdo keyboard somebody bought. You're right, they're more common than you think, though. But here is a keyboard from a major laptop manufacturer, one of the top 5, and I won't tell you which one it is, but some of you might recognize it. And they've done something interesting to this keyboard as well. If you notice here, the Windows key, that's kind of in a strange place. That's where the delete key normally goes. Well, okay, that's not too weird, but if that's where the delete key is, what's where the Windows key goes? And the problem is that Windows space does something, and so does delete space. It answers yes to do you want to delete? So instead of pressing Windows space, I kept pressing delete space. And I deleted vital files off my hard drive several times the first week. And this laptop manufacturer, if you search for their name, Windows key, you'll find that there are millions of users who hate this feature and not a single one that likes it. Yet for probably over 4 years now, they keep shipping these keyboards, and there is an actual black market of people selling replacement keyboards for this laptop. Why? Was someone just, this is one that I can't even figure any sense whatsoever. And I guarantee people have lost critical files for that. So here's a TV remote control. Who decided that 4 columns of 3 rows is better than 4 rows of 3 columns? The telephone, the number keeper, it's always 3 rows. Sorry, 3 columns. Who decided it's just a good idea to rearrange these things? Now that's a TV, not too much damage. But imagine if you put this on an ATM or a calculator. Be careful of your symbols. This is a button. I'm not quite sure if I should press it. I'm looking at this, and it wasn't in Hungary, but it was in an Eastern European country, and I'm thinking, if I push it, what's going to happen? Do red lights go off? Am I near Chernobyl somewhere? I mean, I don't know quite what it is. If we zoom out, I still couldn't quite figure out, but it's actually in a lift, but it still took me like 4 days to figure out. It's the fan. It's to turn the fan on in the lift, but I was still afraid to touch it for a long time. Here's Windows Media Player, and for some reason, they think it's really cool to have all kinds of different skins, and I can understand some of the skins, but if you turn on the menus on Windows Media Player, if you maximize Windows Media Player, and then say go to Classic Look, the Classic Look will fade in and out, but it shrinks the skin to go inside the Classic Look. When the Classic Look comes away, you end up with Windows Media Player inside of where the Classic Look was. And if you have a maximized application behind it, it looks like they're one application. So you're here and you're like, oh, I want to close this application. You go up to the top right, red X closes. Well, no, because the Windows Media Player team decided to redefine and make the close button cool looking for Windows Media Player. And you don't realize it because it's resized inside. So now you've closed everything on your desktop, your mail, Outlook, I mean, everything's closed, and you're still trying to close. Oh, wait. Now, I don't care what you do inside my window. If you want to make it look nice, but leave certain functionality alone. Don't change the close button. Don't change the minimize button. That was one of the huge problems on the Unix platforms forever. Every windowed application had its own window manager. It was even worse. Some of them you minimize by right-clicking over here. Some of them you minimize by double-clicking in the bottom left. Every application worked differently. That was a huge thing for Windows. We knew how to close every application. And now the Windows Media team has changed it. This is a bus. And it's gone on top of the overpass, and it's flipped over. And unfortunately, 4 or 5 people died in this accident, including the driver. And after they did the safety investigation on this, and I actually know quite a bit about this because several years ago I used to do data processing and statistics analysis for automobile and safety accidents, et cetera. And they did a complete study on this, and they realized the driver had just changed to his shift less than 2 hours ago. He was fresh. He was an experienced driver. He wasn't drinking. He had enough sleep. No problems. And after they did a thorough investigation, what they found out was that he was in this what's called a high occupancy vehicle lane where you're only allowed to have cars that have 3 or more people in them or buses. And it was around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe a little bit later, it was dark, and he's driving down and he sees this exit sign. And the problem is that when you're driving the right, exit should only be on the right, and in many of these HOV lanes, they have these isolated lanes, and you're driving and all of a sudden you have to go in the middle. So it's very common to see a sign with a black diamond that says go left. And he thought that's what it was. And in fact, it was actually a left-hand exit that goes to the top of the bridge and tees off. So he's driving, and all of a sudden, he's doing 140 kilometers an hour on a bus, which is, fine there. Gets to the top and realizes, uh-oh, I'm at the top of a bridge. I'm about to fly off. So he spins the wheel, but he's driving too fast, and it flipped over. And you might say it was the driver's fault. And in the end, it was the driver's fault. But what led him to this mistake? An easily misinterpreted sign that was outside of the norm. And we do this in software just as often. Purpose-driven development, we've all heard of feature-driven development, test-driven development, and those sorts. And this is a picture, a fairly typical picture from a country that I won't name, but it's one of the countries in North America between Mexico and Canada. And what's happened here is there is architecture here. Nobody just decided to build these buildings by themselves. There was an architect involved probably in every one of them. The problem is they were all completely isolated architects that didn't consult each other. So what happened was, you can see that the owner of BP here, he said that I want to open a petrol station and I have the following requirements. I want customers to see the price of my petrol. I want them not to get wet, and I want them to be able to get in and out very quickly and have lots of lights. And that's what everyone else had the same requirement. And then some restaurants came along and said, we want everyone to see our logos. We want to sell cheap, greasy food and make it easy for people to get in and out. And everyone just took their little block and designed just for their block. And you might say, we never do this in software, but we do. Think of each one of these blocks as a component. How often do we go off and let everyone architect their own little component and just put the things together at the end? Versus seeing how it'll all fit together at the end. Now, if you were buying, say, a flat, this is probably not the best view, but it's very typical. It's very functional, but the user interface isn't quite the best. Whereas if you have architects and then a master architect to think about how everything integrates together. Now, it doesn't matter what city this is, but it's a bit more typical for our side of the planet. Whether you pick Amsterdam or Budapest or Prague or wherever, this is not necessarily a typical scene, yet it's very, very functional. The building in the middle used to be the stock exchange. And those two red columns were navigational beacons from hundreds of years ago because there's a river here, and the island splits the river. And they used to put fire on top so the ships knew, hey, you need to turn right or left here. And they've long since gone out of functional use because now we have radar and GPS and the ships don't need that anymore. But they've left them because they were nice to look at as well. How much of our software sticks around because of good user interfaces? Usually users try and get rid of it as soon as they can. We also have a problem of security over usability. So here's another example of incrementalism. Here's a bank machine. And evidently they had some kind of problem with people, I don't know what they were doing to it, but some kind of problem. So they decided to put a security feature on top of it. But if you look down towards the bottom, you'll see there's bricks there. The distance from the bar to the buttons is approximately 1.2, 1.3 meters. So maybe you've brought along a broomstick that you can poke the buttons, but how do you get your money? How do you get your card back? No one really thought about this. And my point again is that this is an opportunity because you need to be looking at usage statistics. Now, I don't expect that someone put this on and thought, well, let's watch the machine. No. But if you were this bank and all of a sudden you noticed a drop off, hey, no one's using the machine anymore. Well, you might just say, well, I guess customers change their habit, which is probably what we do in software. If we built in, we changed a menu feature and all of a sudden people stopped using it, well, first of all, we probably wouldn't even bother to look. We should be looking at these things between releases, seeing if there's a feature that we know everyone uses and they stopped using it all of a sudden. It's probably not because they dislike the feature all of a sudden. It might be another change we did that's preventing them from using it. And in this case, that would be a case to think about. Why are people not using this ATM machine anymore? Worse yet, this is also a publicity problem because this building, it's actually the side of a police station. So if you live in that town, I'm not quite sure what message that sends. You probably can't read that from back here, but it's a password policy. We've all seen crazy ones, and I'll read through it quickly. But minimum 8 characters, at least 1 uppercase, 1 lowercase, 1 digit, should not contain the login name. At least 1 character from the 2nd to 6th positions must be a non-alphabet. Passwords should not be words in any language, slang, dialect, jargon, and acronyms. Should not contain the personal information of names or family. Should not be a common word where only the letter O was changed to a letter 0 and the letter I was changed to a pipe. How long will it take you to make a password that actually conforms to this system? And if you've implemented mandatory password changing, say every 30 days, let's just assume it's going to take me around a half an hour to make a password for this, probably. Well, let's say you're a very big company. Now, Microsoft didn't write this one, but this is actually a system that runs inside of Microsoft. And Microsoft has 75,000 employees. Now, not all of their employees use this, but let's assume that 30,000 employees do. 30,000 employees times half an hour is a lot of hours. It's 15,000 hours a month, assuming 30,000 employees use the system. That's a lot of lost time. Worse yet, What are we teaching users to do? Well, I can't remember my password, so I'm going to write it down and put it on a sticky note underneath my keyboard. That's real secure. Why don't we just tell users, forget all the funny letters, forget all the funny characters, minimum password length, 20. And you know what? You can type in sentences like, I hate my password administrator. They will never, ever forget that password in their life. And next month they can change it to, I still hate the stupid person. They'll never forget them, and it's just as secure. In fact, it's more secure. Sure, you get more security when you have more randomness, but a longer key will compensate for that. And it'll certainly compensate for them putting it under the keyboard or on the monitor. Is anyone using Vista? Okay, Vista's got a lot of nice things. This isn't one of them. The problem is that this is another thing, in my opinion, that makes people feel secure. User access control. Well, the problem is, we might read it, hey, Joe EXE wants to change your clock. Okay, well, I don't know Joe EXE, but I'm not too worried about my clock, so go ahead. The problem is the average user, the first time they say, oh, what should I press? What should I press? Well, you know what? After this happens 5 times in the first 30 minutes they've had Vista, they just realize, hey, I click continue and everything's okay. So 2 months down the road it says, hey, virus EXE wants to format your hard drive. Okay, continue. Because they don't read them anymore, and even if they do, they don't understand what it's asking them. Now, there are some other security features in Vista that are a real help. The way that IE processes ActiveX's and things, it puts them in a separate user. There are a lot of security enhancements, but this is one that it just decreases usability in my mind. Most developers just turn it off. Now, this one I'm going to run through real quick, and this one actually is probably the only, I have 3 slides here that actually have nothing to do with software. But the reason I want to put them here is because this is what our software looks like to our end users. Okay? Now, I have 2 sons, and I have one that's 2, and I have one that's 11. And the one that's 11 didn't live with us until he was around 8 or 9. He lived with his mother. And she lived in the US, so the only countries he could identify was the US and Canada, and I think he could find Mexico. So he came to live with us in Europe, and I thought it'd be a good idea if he could at least identify which countries he traveled to. So I went out, and I happened to buy this game for Christmas, and it had the flags, and I thought it'd be cool until I looked a little bit closer. And normally I use this in my internationalization decks, but let's look at that side of the world. Well, Cuba looks a little bit strange, and I can never understand why the Americans thought they were such a threat, but I can see they're a bit bigger, and I can see why Cuba's mad, because Florida's aggressively pointing at them. And that's not too bad, but if we look around a bit, they've renamed it to the lake. Let's get to our side of the world. I could never figure out why Kuwait folded so quickly in the first Iraq war. And then, I don't want to touch politics here, but the Palestinians have been asking for their own state. The problem is they're just geographically confused. They've been looking in the wrong spot. If you look at the blue one on the right, see Palestine? There it is. They're just looking in the wrong place. That's actually Pakistan. But imagine this is your user interface. If it's so confusing, nobody can find the proper things. And this is what a lot of our users feel like. And of course, this one's just blatant mistakes. But here's Egypt. And I was presenting to Cairo one time, and my Egyptian friends were surprised that they had long-lost brothers on the Western Africa coast. There's Eltali, and there's some other fun ones in here. Can anyone read what country London's in? It's in the United Kingdom. This one you're probably familiar with. You've gone through a website, maybe you've bought something, maybe you're trying to even just download software. No shipping involved. Country. Required, but I only have one choice. Well, then why present it? Why give the users additional information? It just doesn't make any sense at all. Here's one. Now, I spend half of my year in Russia, and I spend half my year in Cyprus, where I live, and then I spend the rest of the year flying around to places like this. But where's Cyprus? Cyprus has been around since 1960. It's not exactly a new country. In fact, Cyprus is one of the members of the EU. You think they could find it. Now, I'm kind of used to this. And a lot of times they say, just put in Greece. And in fact, if somebody's going to mail me something, I can put in Greece and put in Cyprus for the city. And it takes a little bit longer, but it gets there. And since Cyprus is so small, the postman knows where I live and he brings it. But it's a bit of a problem when I have to buy something and I put in my credit card because my bank is going to say, hey, address doesn't match. right? How hard is it to go onto the search engine of your choice and say, hey, can I have an up-to-date list of countries? Is it really that difficult? Now, if it was only Cyprus, it wouldn't be so bad, but here's another one, my favorite, one of the airlines. So I'm giving them some feedback. I've taken all this time to fill it out. Press submit. You couldn't do that before I typed this really long email to you. Now, worse yet, I figure, okay, I'm going to fax them because I'm really mad. So I go to find, where's Russia? Russia's not exactly a small country, and it's been around, I don't know, for what? 2,000 years or something crazy? I mean, you couldn't, but they have Cyprus. A lot of times we give users dialogues that really don't mean anything, but we lead them to believe there's something there, and isn't. So in this case, it used to be $99.96, but now it's on sale for $99.88. The recommended security level for this zone is high. The level that you have chosen is lower than this. Please choose a security level of higher. This is Internet Explorer Amsterdam Red Light District version. Or how about this one? Windows XP. You can see I'm not connected, but my only option is to disconnect. You can reproduce this pretty easily, by the way. So what am I left to do? Please help us save water. Press the flush button twice. Now, you might say it's just a bad translation, but in Turkish it says the same thing. Okay, Windows Vista. You can see that run on a schedule is unchecked, yet scheduling defragmentation is enabled. So is it enabled or not? And these are things that have gone through, and even worse yet, these have been through usability tests. Most of us don't do any sort of usability tests whatsoever. So if things that are going through usability tests are this bad, what's our software like? Only for dine-in and takeaway. Well, how else can I get it? Proper for 0 to 36 months, for age 3 months and up. Okay. I'm really confused in this one. And the problem is that it's an exclamation point, so I'm really kind of afraid to press the OK button. I don't know what's going to happen. These are ones we all kind of know about. In order to complete the installation, the installer has to reboot your system now. Unfortunately, this is a top-level dialog, and I can't get rid of it. So now I have to move this dialog around my machine, shut everything down, and save it. And I like this part. In order to complete the uninstallation, the installer, shouldn't it be the uninstaller? Automatic updates. This one's great. You can press restart later, and the problem is it'll restart later. The problem is in 5 minutes, it'll ask you again. And worse yet, restart now is the default. So if you're in Visual Studio, you're coding away, and you just happen to press a space bar when this thing pops up, guess what? You're restarting right now. Click turn off to install important updates. Why can't I restart and install? Why do I have to turn off and install? And this is just I don't know why somebody can't fix this. This one, I'm not quite sure what it's going to do. It's disabled. Do not restart now, but it's checked. More state machines. This is good. You're probably used to this. You've picked a country. I picked Cyprus. Yet after I hit submit, I have to come back and select outside US and Canada for a state. And it's cleared the rest of my fields, including my credit card numbers and stuff. So if I have put a country such as Cyprus or Hungary, do web programmers not know about the if statement? If not US, automatically select? And this isn't just an isolated website. This is all over the place. This one's Adobe. It's a very, very common problem. Here's another one. What class do I want to fly? Economy. This airline doesn't have anything but economy. Here's another airline. I'm checking in, putting in my passport. You know, my passport expired in 1992, but I'm going to do electronic check-in right now. So often we present things to users in formats they're not expecting or they're not familiar with. You have 4 twiddle bits left on your disk. What do you want to do? Your application is consuming too much memory. It's using 4096 super bits. We use terms that make sense to us, but don't make any sense to the users. So here's a parking garage, and you're driving in. Now, I know about how high my car is in meters, And sure, that I can convert it to millimeters, but when I'm driving into a car garage and I have cars right behind me and I have to do it on the fly instantly, there are tire marks underneath here from people slamming on the brakes to figure out how many millimeters high their car is. And I'm pretty sure that we've had car accidents from the person behind him who hasn't seen the sign yet bumping into them. Now, I presented this slide at TechEd last week, and somebody in the comment form wrote, well, it's not really a problem here in Europe as we're used to the metric system. Well, I know, so am I. I live here. That's not the problem. The problem is it's in millimeters, not meters. How many of you measure your car in millimeters? We do this in software, though, as well. Here's one, another airline. I'm flying. It's evidently it's picked up that I'm in Russia, but it didn't tell me. This looks like a Spanish telephone number to me because 952 is the mobile prefix for Spain. But I didn't recognize this is actually a Moscow telephone number. It's supposed to be +7 space 4952. It took about half an hour of calling different numbers in Spain to figure out this is actually a Russian number. About 44,842 days. Just tell me how many years. I mean, I don't think in days when it gets that big. Or from TechEd last week, this is the actual evaluation form. Feedback can be submitted on these sessions 15 minutes from the beginning of the session until 720 minutes after the session. When we start to deal in big numbers, I mean, it's not that hard. .NET has all these conversion routines for us. Display things in a smaller format. Now, it happens to be 12 hours, but again, this leads to mistakes. This is probably the only picture in the slide deck that I didn't take. I think every other picture is something that I took, and some of you have seen this one before. And let's imagine that the developer is the designer of the cart. He's the architect. Now, he could say, stupid user, he overloaded the cart. But if this is a frequent occurrence, you can laugh, but then might you not think, what could I do to prevent the user from overloading the cart? Because the donkeys are getting hurt. There's a lot of donkey damage out there. Well, you could do a couple things. You could maybe put in a sliding axle. That's a feature. You could even charge for an upgrade. My point here is that just because the user does something stupid, and maybe it is genuinely stupid, you should be looking at this as an opportunity to improve your software. Some real quick examples. Oops. Okay. Well, the last one was a standard do not disturb sign. You know, you put it on your hotel door. This one's not going to be confused. Now, I think he's supposed to be going like this, do not disturb me, please, but look at him a little bit closer. You're really not going to, if I see that in a door, there's no way I'm disturbing you. Everyone's probably familiar with this. Now, it doesn't matter if you smoke or not. Everyone knows what this symbol means. Now, normally if you're checking into a hotel or something, you might see it on the door. Okay, no problem. But if you're a smoker and you've already gone into your hotel room and it's on the outside of your door, well, I forgot about it, didn't see it, I was busy. But look where this hotel put the notice. That makes sense, because what's the first thing a smoker's going to grab? He's going to grab the ashtray. Oh, I can't smoke. Now they might still smoke, but they've seen it. This is what I'm talking about. Don't put notices in your software about do not press this button, in a hidden Easter egg in the about box. If you really shouldn't press that button, hide the button somewhere so it's not so easy and put a warning on it, and don't default it to yes, trash my hard drive. Another keyboard, okay, now pretty standard. The picture angle is a little bit funny. But look at this one. Now this is just a concept. But you can instantly switch from, say, English to Russian to paint shop to whatever because they're all LCDs. It's because somebody's thinking outside the box. Failed attempts. Clippy was a nice idea until he actually got into the field. This was somebody on the office team thinking, how can we help out users? But it didn't turn out so well. So just because you come up with a good idea and you think it's a great idea, if your users start telling you, hey, this thing stinks, you might want to listen to them, okay? Not everything you do is going to succeed. We went over this one, the old expanding menus. The idea was there's so many menus, we'll put the ones that the users use most. The problem is they would go, hey, where's the option I used last week? It disappeared. And they were calling Microsoft tech support to say, hey, features are disappearing, something's eating my software. Real steps forward. I've picked on some bad examples. Here's a really good example. This is Internet Explorer 7. If you open a bunch of tabs and you press Control-Q, you can see all the pages as thumbnails. And you don't even have to go to them to close them. They all have little X's. You can rearrange them. You can do all kinds of things. So if you go to a search and you open 50 pages, hey, which one do I want to see? You don't have to go through them one by one. Press Control-Q, and then you can look at them and close the ones you don't want. Office 2007, of course. This is my good example as well, because what this does is this is a friendly way to display something to the user saying, hey, I want some information about the crash. Collect the data. That's how Microsoft figured out with Office 2007. They brought users in with Office 2003, and they said, we want you to perform this task. And then they videotaped them to see how they were doing it. And they're realizing, why is the user doing 15 mouse clicks to get to something? Or we never even knew that feature was there. And that's how they were able to prioritize and figure out how to redo 2007. This, I haven't looked at this product, but if you're doing websites, it's a usability test for products. And what I wanted to do here was show you a couple kind of examples real quick. Now, I have a tablet here. If anyone wants to see it later, you can come up and you can look at it. But the tablet is a very natural way to do input. If you think about the average person, newbie, who's not into computers, do they want to learn how to type, or wouldn't they just like to pick up a computer and start writing? Why don't they do that? Windows Vista has tablet support. Windows XP has tablet support. Why? Is it the hardware? No. Is it the handwriting recognition? No, actually the handwriting recognition is pretty good. It can even get my chicken scratch. The problem is the software. We haven't rebuilt the software to act like a pen. We've said, well, the pen's like a specialized keyboard. No one wants to do that. Excuse me. That's why you'll see tablets in certain industry verticals. You'll see them in maybe hospitals. But the average user doesn't use them because using Word or Outlook or any of the standard software is so horribly painful. But what's worse yet is it doesn't even have to be that way. For those of you that haven't seen how it works, you have something like this. So let's just bring up a copy of Outlook Express here. And what I'll do is, okay, I'll hide that, and I will say, new email message. Okay. Now, you can see I have a pen here, and it knows when the pen's in range. So when I get closer, it puts this little thing. So if I want to type into this field, I have to click here, wait for it to come up. Sometimes it goes away. So here it is. And in Windows Vista, it's even more fun because in XP, that little button generally pops up right here. In Vista, it pops up in a different place every time. So you have to click here, wait for it to pop up, then find it. And sometimes it pops up over things like this, and you can't move it. And so I have three modes. I have this mode, and I have this mode, and this mode. The problem is I'm constantly switching between them. And so if I want to write something like, let's just go to subject. So I've written hello, and it got it. It was pretty good. But sometimes it can't do things like, I'll say, well, for some reason, I'm not getting my pen input. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, so it got hello and I can insert. But sometimes it's very biased towards whatever language you have installed. So it's doing spell check against English. But if I want to do something else, I'll come to character mode. Now, character mode, if I try and write hello here, what it does is it drops the recognition. And this time it's actually working. It almost never works. Usually when you write down you write a lowercase l, 99% of the time it decides it's a pipe or a 1. Now what I want to show you is here I want to correct. Let's say I want to correct this. Here I can just, let's say I want to come over here, and I'll type something else again. Okay, so let's say the word's wrong. To fix it I have to go 1, 2, 3, 4 clicks to correct things. It's so painful. And I think that they did such a great job on handwriting recognition. They put so much focus on there, but didn't really do usability testing on the back end. And we, again, maybe do this a lot of times in our software. We're focusing the wrong things. We really need to see what is the user actually doing. If they were collecting click data, And this is one of the things I'm proposing. I'm starting to work on a framework that you put in your WinForms or WPF application that records how far does the mouse move between menu commands. Which menu commands do they execute? How many times do they click something? Those sorts of things. So one of the things I'm working on now, and it's very, very primitive, but is a replacement for the input. And this is actually what's killing the tablet platform, is just this simple piece of software. So I have a new one here. It's transparent, so I can see through it. And whenever I move the pen near, it says, hey, you want to write on me? And if I write hello. Of course, it's not working here, but. It recognizes it, but instead of correcting, the minute I move near it, it zooms out and I can just do instant correct. It knows that if I'm near the word, I can just come in and correct things. Okay? Little things like that. Other things is, how many of you have ever pasted into Office? You go to a web page, and you paste some text, and it takes the format. And you're like, I don't want that. 99% of the time, you just want the text, not the format. So then you have to go to Edit, Paste Special, and even in 2007, you have to click the little down arrow, Paste Special, then unformatted text, then OK. It's like 6 mouse clicks for the most commonly used function. If you were to build in tracking into your software, you might notice, why is somebody repeating these 6 steps over and over and over? Or monitor the undo command. If somebody's pressing undo a lot in your software, you might want to go back and see what are they doing before. Maybe you have a button that's too easy to press and they're undoing because they keep bumping into the wrong button. These are all the sorts of things you can do if you start to collect information about your users. Another thing you can do is sit with your users. How many of you ever actually have just gone down and sat with your users and just said, look, I'm Joe Programmer. I'm not going to bother you today. I'm going to spend half an hour. I'm going to spend half an hour just watching what you do today. You would get so much feedback from that. Let me show you just one more little example. And this is one that's a little bit. Let's say I want to rename this. Right click, rename. When you rename a file, how often do you want to change a file extension? So why did I select the file extension? Now I have to come in here separately. Or let's say I've completely renamed, because a lot of times what I do is I do new, say, text document, but I really want to make it a batch file, so I'll type then it asks me, oh, no, I didn't really mean to change the extension. And then it loses my whole file name again. And I'm not doing this to pick on Windows. I'm doing this because there are so many little things like this. And we totally dismiss them. We don't even look for them. They have huge impacts on our users. From a frustration standpoint, from a financial standpoint. And I'm not talking about, you don't have to have a huge usability expert come into your application. If you just sat down and fixed the little things, you'd make massive improvements in your software, in reliability, because less bugs, and usability. Think about the bus, wrong sign, and 5 people got killed. Okay? That's all I have. Thank you for your